Welcome back. I wanted to bring to your attention that according to recent news, Netanyahu is planning to use militias against Hamas, even militias with links to jihadists, jihadists. This is a terrible idea. Even if you don't care about Palestine and see the Gaza conflict in terms of only Israel's interest, you'll have to admit that using militias, even jihadist militias, is a terrible idea that makes no sense in terms of counterinsurgency. And I say this because if you are interested in Israel winning the war, you should have an idea of what winning looks like. And whether you like it or not, the Palestinian conflict is a non-conventional war, an insurgency. And insurgencies are not defeated unless the government fighting them has a political solution, which Netanyahu doesn't have, because Netanyahu and his coalition benefit precisely more of having the Hamas boogeyman alive than on peace, of using it to tame Israeli institutions like the Shin Bet, as they have tamed the IDF, the army, and they seek to tame the judiciary and the attorney general, of whom they want to get rid of, and to create, of course, the climate of fear that makes Likud electable. Only a political solution will downsize the Hamas threat to levels that are insignificant enough to produce political change and that could be dealt efficiently just with police work. For instance, in the case of the Irish Republican Army, once the political solution was achieved in the late 90s, the IRA stopped being a threat. It doesn't mean that the terrorism stopped, because there were split factions that wanted to continue fighting against the English. But they were this and there was more than one split. These fringe groups were so small to produce any political damage and could be destroyed and deactivated by the police with what it needs in cases like this: intelligence and special forces. As we saw in my video about counterinsurgency, once these groups are becoming significant in terms of numbers and they have no political support, they are not more dangerous than any gang that any criminal gang could be, and they should be treated with the same tools by the police. So let's mention some examples that show how bad this idea is if what you want is to beat the insurgency, of course, which in the case of Netanyahu, in my opinion, is doubtful. Because, as I said before, Netanyahu's coalition thrives when there is chaos. So, case number one, the United States used the Mujahideen against the Soviets in Afghanistan, and then, having weakened the Soviets, they left. But the Mujahideen stayed and perpetuated a situation of instability where warring warlords fought one another until the Taliban, sponsored by Pakistan, set peace, a fundamentalist peace that to this day is suffered by Afghan women, and we know the rest. And even if you don't care about Afghan women, consider that the final beneficiary will apparently be Vladimir Putin, who is willing to bring the kind of peace he brought to the Sahel and Syria to make, in this case, to make feasible Chinese investments in Afghan lithium, which for security reasons the Chinese were reluctant, and a corridor to the west for Russian oil. So you remember when I mentioned that Putin wants to be the privateer of the Yuan Song? Well, this is an example. The paramilitary number two, example number two, the paramilitary groups that fought communist insurgency in Colombia and Central America, which soon realized fighting for territory, for criminal activities was more lucrative than fighting to secure the economic interest of their patrons in the area, is another example. And is you can, for instance, the one of the more clear cases is the participation of paramilitary groups in the drug trade in the case of Colombia. Thus, you got these conflicts in Colombia and Central America created a generation that either as former guerrillas or paramilitaries knew nothing but to use a rifle. And in failed states, or in the case of Colombia, in the parts of the country where the state had no power, these groups contributed to make even weaker and more corrupt those governments. And so we find a degeneration of these groups into gangs. And of course, the paramilitary or the become pretty much another gang. They don't solve your problem, they compound it. Case number three, the Pied-Noirs in the case of Algeria, which might not have been created by the French government or even by the French paratroopers who led the counterinsurgency effort in the Kasbah, but they were widely tolerated by the French government. And these Pied-Noirs were nothing but the settlers, the French settlers in Algeria, who wanted to fight the insurgents in their own terms. The Pied-Noirs did a favor to the insurgents, though, the FLN, because they helped the insurgents deplete the center, the political center, in their stupid endeavor of subduing the Algerians through fear. They ended up creating the political vacuum the insurgents filled, and in the end, even moderates joined the FLN to either to stay in power or to save their own lives. That's how just 5 years after the Battle of Algiers, 1957, the French had to leave the country in 1962 after the insurgents refused anything but full independence. In the case of Palestine, the far-right Jewish settlers have been playing the role of the Pied-Noirs for a long time with the complicity of Netanyahu's government, which has been expanding settlements, especially in the West Bank, at an unprecedented rate. This adds fuel to the fire and alienates allies, but that's convenient for Netanyahu's coalition, which only needs the United States support, which they have to do with Palestinians as they please, although with certain limits when it comes to other countries like Iran. Not much in the case of Syria or Lebanon, but in the case of Iran, at least the Trump administration has drawn some limits. The other source of support, the the Netanyahu coalition needs is the population support, and on the latter, thanks to the fragmented mediocre opposition in Israel and the mediocrity of the Democratic Party, 82% of Jewish settlers, according to a recent poll, support expelling Gazans, which unavoidably will be extended. So, an eviction that unavoidably will be extended to the West Bank. There is no other word by ethnic cleansing to describe this, but this is what happens when you cannot propose a compelling narrative, which, in my opinion, should be based on the Olmer plan. Netanyahu can live without Arab states recognizing Israel, or with Israel even becoming a pariah before the West, with the exception of the United States, of course. But Netanyahu is definitely not willing to waste the historic opportunity October 7 handed him on the corpses of his fellow Jews. That's why he doesn't hesitate when it comes to insane ideas like starving Gazans or funding jihadists to attack Hamas. After all, if Gazans are expelled from the Gaza Strip and the rest of the Palestinians from the West Bank, as it would be too risky for them to having angry Palestinians in the West Bank too close to Tel Aviv, these groups might have their revenge against Jews abroad with acts of terrorism or growing anti-Semitism, which will revive, of course. But by then, that might not make much difference for Likud. It will for Israel's democracy, but it would be good news for Likud, at least for the part of Likud that is led by, that identifies with Netanyahu's coalition. Which brings us to the Democratic Party. Democrats can continue saying that Trump is bad and expecting different results. They must have a positive message, even if that message hurts Biden's feelings, because much of this tragedy was caused by him. And the best message they can embrace is based on the Olmer's plan, at least to show the political actors that they are betting on something different from Biden in 2029. Also, of course, they must start using the tools of counterinsurgency to expose Netanyahu's management of the war as nonsense in terms of precisely counterinsurgency, because a nonsense from which the only beneficiaries are not Israelis but his coalition, because if the war that is fought by Netanyahu doesn't benefit Israel in terms of counterinsurgency, then who is benefiting? The answer is Likud. Is the Israeli people willing to continue sacrificing lives and isolating themselves from the world just to make Likud more electable? Well, that's something that unfortunately the Israeli opposition is not doing well. And if the Democrats don't at least for now, a sound alternative proposal, if they don't expose the real intentions behind insane actions like recruiting jihadists to fight Hamas, then who is going to do it? So once again, the Democratic Party has a moral obligation of trying to fix, at least on the narrative for now, because they are out of power, the mess created by Biden's obsession with turning his pal Bibi into Julius Caesar. And will they do that? So far, it doesn't look likely. And having said that, let me leave you with our newscast.
Good evening. This is Brian Thomas Simons, and these are the main headlines of this hour. Among other news,
9. Trump blames Biden's immigration policy for Boulder attack and other American woes. Trump condemned the horrific Boulder attack on former President Biden's immigration policies. As part of his charges, he said the attack will not be tolerated, and claimed the suspect in the attack came in through Biden's ridiculous open border policy. He also blamed immigrants for the Slovenian supplier of Melania as a male bride for not honoring the clause about replacements. She's 55, and I have had to pass her to Elon as punishment just because the supplier is not honoring the return and replacement clause. You can't trust immigrants, and that's the end of it, concluded the president. Immigrants are to blame for the pandemic of obesity plaguing America. I am already at 243 pounds because of these illegals, because all of them are illegals and criminals. I don't know how Stevie Miller does to keep looking like Hannibal Lecter when he was played by Anthony Hopkins, added President Trump. Finally, the president blamed immigrants for not being more collaborative with ICE. I am trying to please my MAGA base, to show them long lines of migrants frog marched back to their shithole countries. And they don't even have the courtesy of crying for the photographs. MAGA people love them when they cry. Why can't all immigrants be like white South Africans? 10. President Trump reproaches MERS for Nazis during the Second World War. President Ramaphosa sold into slavery by Trump. President Trump had to be restrained when, during a meeting with his German counterpart, Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he reproached MERS for the Nazi barbarity during the Second World War. After interjecting his German counterpart, President Trump added, "That was not a pleasant day for you, right, you Nazi scum?" and tried to arrest Chancellor Merz for war crimes. With Trump restrained by Treasury Secretary Bessent and other members of Bessent's entourage and with Susie Wiles crying disconsolately in the background, the meeting had to be cancelled, and Chancellor Merz had to be escorted out of the White House premises while Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, clearly intoxicated, followed Merz with insults and provocations in Merz's way out. When the session resumed, half an hour later, it did so in a more positive tone, as President Trump announced that South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who had been arrested for genocide against the white minority in that country, had been satisfactorily sold for $10,000, auction that took place in Fort Bragg after the president addressed the troops. Little by little, we will balance the budget, concluded the president. Finally, President Trump expressed his disappointment with Elon Musk. "Elon and I had a great relationship. I don't know if we will anymore. All of a sudden, he had a problem, and he only developed the problem when he found out we're going to cut the EV mandate. And he has accepted Melania and Eric as atonement, but I don't know if that will be enough for me to forgive him." 11. Argentinian jurist Roberto Gargarella. Kirchner's sentence unlikely to trigger judicial revenge on Milei since Milei only commits misdemeanors. He doesn't know how to steal. Asked about the consequences for President Milei of the Supreme Court confirming former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner's sentence for the Vialidad corruption case, which involved scandals in 51 public works, Argentine jurist Roberto Gargarella dismissed the speculations about a revenge movement that would try to put the current president in prison. In his own words, jurist Gargarella declared that Kirchner's sentence is unlikely to trigger judicial revenge on Milei because so far, Javier Milei only commits misdemeanors, pocket change infractions that would be punished by community service only. He doesn't know how to steal. What Argentinian president would charge $500 for each of the 2 tweets related to dollar Libra? That caused other negative consequences, for instance, the IMF refusing to close the 23 refinance of Argentina's long-term debt as a president who doesn't know how to steal is not reliable. But there is nothing on the criminal side. Have you seen him begging for the attention of Elon Musk and Sylvester Stallone with wet eyes? What adult does that? Malay's misdemeanors are still being investigated by the Peronists, as reported 3 weeks ago by Notier.com.ar. 12th Florida man named Cocaine accused of assaulting subway employees for disrespecting his deeply held religious beliefs. Edward Cocaine, 45, from Brevard County, was arrested and charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault, burglary with assault or battery, and battery after assaulting with a knife 2 subway employees for their bad attitudes. According to Wayne Ivey, Brevard County Sheriff, Cocaine claimed the subway employees had disrespected his deeply held religious beliefs, which dictated that the sandwiches he had ordered were free of charge. Aware of the Patriot defense, the sheriff asked Cocaine whether he was affiliated or intended to join the Republican Party, and when the answer came positive, he decided to let Cocaine go free. If the district attorney wanna present charges, it's up to him, but we have learned how that Patriot defense works, and next thing you know, Cocaine walks out with a $100,000 compensation. I'm not falling for that, concluded the sheriff before confirming that Mr. Cocaine was not intoxicated at the moment of the incident and renewing his threat of using lethal force against people who intended to demonstrate against President Trump on June 14.
This has been the news of this hour. Sponsored by Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit. Have you accepted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior? Did you vote for Trump in 2016 and then in 2020? This is the right church for you. If so, Church of the Holy Redeemer's Power in the Spirit is the only Christian church that can promise you in the Lord to have 72 virgins in heaven for only a donation of $50 a month. You will have access to those 72 virgins in heaven. For an additional $25, you will be allowed to replace 10 of them, and for $100, Heaven Premium, you will be allowed to choose them for yourself. Guaranteed, if you're not satisfied with those 72 virgins after you die, full refund of your money. We accept Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover.